I just finished reading The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart, the second book in the Drowning Empire series. I picked this one up right after reading The Bone Shard Daughter, which is the first book in the series, and holy moly, this is my favorite book that I've read this year. And I read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke this year, so if you've read that book, this is saying something. Bone Shard Daughter didn't quite surpass Piranesi for me, but The Bone Shard Emperor was even better than The Bone Shard Daughter, and this is my new favorite book of 2022. Bone Shard Daughter came out in 2020, Bone Shard Emperor came out in 2021, and The Bone Shard War, the third book in the series, is going to come out in September 2022, and I cannot wait. I don't know what I'm gonna do for the next couple months, so I figured I would tell you about it and we can talk about all of our theories in the comment section. For now though, this is a spoiler-free review and high recommendation for the Drowning Empire series. So this is a high fantasy series with a really complex, intricate, and interesting magic system set in an Asian-inspired setting. All told, it's a very complex story, but it's super straightforward and readable and entertaining, which is probably why I loved it so much. In the story, the Empire is dying. Entire islands are drowning, and these weird sculptures and artifacts from an old era are starting to come alive, threatening that this ancient people is going to come back and threaten the safety of the Empire. So the Emperor is losing his grip on his title as Emperor. That said, everyone is kind of forced to support him as Emperor out of fear, because he is the only one that can use the Bone Shard magic, and the Bone Shard magic is what is protecting the Empire. How the Bone Shard magic works, though, is that every citizen of the Empire, when they are 8 years old, is forced to go to a tithing festival and tithe a shard of their bone that comes from the base of their skull behind their ear and give it to the Emperor. Not everyone survives these tithing festivals. Those that do have their bone shard given to the Emperor to carve instructions into the bone and put them into what he calls constructs. These constructs are constructed of dead animal parts, and then the bones and the instructions written on them animate those dead bodies. And those constructs are how the Empire continues functioning. There is the leader construct of war, of bureaucracy, of trade, etc., and they all have underling constructs that protect the Empire. But when your bone shard is in use in this magic, you are essentially slowly dying. Your life is cut short by the use of this bone shard, and you get shard sickness. So the protection of the Empire is hurting the citizens of the Empire. The bone shard magic itself is really fascinating and kind of resembles coding, because you have to use a special language and the correct logic and amount of bone shards to get the construct to do what you want it to do. And when people are writing this code into the bone shards, they get into this kind of state of flow. It's like this interesting problem-solving activity that is quite enjoyable, even though as they do it, they are taking the lives of their citizens. Anyways, that's just the premise. The main character we're actually following is the Emperor's daughter, Lynn. And Lynn is competing to become the Emperor to succeed her father, but she is competing against her foster brother. When her foster brother came and joined the family, he brought with him a sickness, and him and Lynn can't remember anything in their lives from before they recovered from this sickness. The Emperor, though, needs someone that he can trust running the Empire, so they are desperately trying to remember their past lives and learn this bone shard magic so that they can succeed him as Emperor. The other main character we are following is a smuggler named Jovis, and unfortunately he has fallen in with the mafia of these islands. So he is struggling to repay his debt to the mafia while also searching for his long-lost wife. His wife was taken many years ago by this blue-sailed ship, and he is trying to hunt her down, but he can't get many leads. As he's doing this, he escapes from an island that is sinking and finds the most adorable animal companion ever. He also accidentally becomes a savior to children of the tithing festivals and becomes somewhat of a folk hero. But it is not a title that he wants because he just wants to find his lost wife. To talk about the writing style, there are actually 5 points of view in this story, but the transition between them is quite seamless, and I didn't even notice that some characters were written first person and some characters were written in third person. It just kind of made it so that the first person perspective characters felt more main than the third person perspective characters, which was really nice and worked really well. So the first person characters are Jovis and Lynn, who I just mentioned. In the second book, their storylines start interacting and it got more confusing about who was speaking chapter to chapter, but like that's my only critique of the book, so pretty good. As for the 3 third person perspectives, 2 are from the same island, Falu and Renami. Renami has also fallen in with the resistance movement to the Empire, who are called the Shardless Few because they do not have shards taken from their skull, and they're trying to end the tithing festivals and create an empire with a more democratic structure. So clearly there is a lot of tension between those 2 storylines. And then the 5th point of view is a character who is sort of unnamed on an island who forgets everything about their past life, so it's not worth talking about until you have read at least the first book. The actual style that these books are written in is very accessible. It's almost YA, especially because the main character, while being an adult, forgets most of her memories, and so she spends a lot of the first book just trying to learn more about the world, kind of like you would if you were a teenage character. And then Jovis is really lighthearted. He doesn't take anything too seriously, he doesn't want to get caught up in the politics of this place, he just wants to find his wife, and he has a really good sense of humor, and then he passes that sense of humor on to his talking animal companion, and the 2 of them have this really comedic, lighthearted banter that is very fun. So the whole story kind of feels like a young adult fiction, and at times I really wanted to recommend this series to my younger female cousins, but the books have some really dark plot lines and themes. For instance, there are a couple graphic descriptions of violence against humans and animals and constructs. Many of the characters have really traumatic backstories, and of course the world is on the edge of an apocalypse. I recently read the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, and if you've read that series, I would say that this series is almost as dark as the Broken Earth Trilogy. The difference being that where the Broken Earth Trilogy kind of focuses on this really sad, dreary, oppressive landscape and situation, the Drowning Empire series focuses more on the characters and their hope for the future of the Empire. These books dive into a lot of different themes, more than I can tell you about in this short recommendation video, but some of the ones that stuck out to me are the hopelessness that you feel when there is no right thing to do, the question of morality and whether there is a right thing to do, perseverance, what it means to be a good leader, environmental responsibility, because there is rumors that these islands are drowning because of the mines that are operating there, and then also personhood and who deserves to be considered a person. It does feel almost a little sci-fi-y because even though these constructs are powered by magic, they are also powered kind of by this programming language, and they can be programmed to learn and to feel emotion. And then this question comes in of, are they people who deserve to be treated equally with humans? So I can't recommend this series enough for all of those reasons and more, the more being the central romance in the second book. Oh my god. If you liked this book, then I might recommend the Broken Earth Trilogy, which also takes place in an apocalyptic high fantasy setting with a magic system that manipulates the natural world, or She Who Became the Sun, which is a historical fiction in an Asian setting that has some light fantasy elements, and the main character really reminds me of Lynn from the Drowning Empire series because she is also persevering and struggling to gain power power. There is also a really slow burn romance in this book that kept me going throughout, but ultimately I found this one a lot more slower paced and more literary, whereas the Drowning Empire series is really accessible and really fast paced with lots of adventure, and there's always something going on. I never wanted to put it down. I haven't read a lot of fantasy, but I am super interested in other high fantasy series, especially written by women with strong female characters and maybe even queer romances. So if you have any recommendations, I would absolutely love to hear about them in the comments section. And I highly recommend that you start the Drowning Empire series and jump on this bandwagon before the third book comes out in September. Let me know if you picked this book series up, and I will talk to you in a future video.